Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are discussing Season 1, Episode 20, Dead Man's Blood, through the theme of waste. I'm Abigail, your host, and joining me today is Alesha. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. Super excited. This is another John Winchester episode, so so good to be back to trash him some more.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here because we need your expertise on this topic.
I can major in it.
Amazing. It's now time for our series recap, The Road So Far. I thought that we would collaborate a little bit on this week's season recap. And I know you maybe haven't seen all of these episodes recently, Alesha, but from your memory, what would you say are the most important things that have happened in this season so far? If you were to pick like 3 to 5 things to be like, that's important.
1, Sam's powers. We're still kind of like unsure where they come from still, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think them finally finding John Winchester. I remember when I got to that point, it being like, oh my God, John Winchester. I thought they were going to drag it out way longer, but like, John's here. He's just an asshole. And what's another really important? The demon thing. I think we're getting close. I think this episode is kind of the beginning of the next, 2 episode arc of demons and how terrifying they are. And yeah, and today's episode of vampires. So that's
this is like a big lore episode, both to build the rest of the plot for the season, but also it's the first time we're getting
a new creature.
Yeah, and a significant one that is going to like reoccur. Like a lot of the monsters we've had so far this season have been kind of one-offs, like, even if they are based in lore, like, you know, Bloody Mary and like the Hook Man, which do have some like folklore around them, but are not going to reoccur, and vampires are going to be like a kind of a staple of the supernatural for literally until the end. So
yeah, I'm super, I forgot that vampires weren't like a thing at first, right? Like they were like this is like a big bad for them, which is super funny to me. So I'm like,
that brings us to this episode and to our 30-second recap. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, old hunter guy dies. Turns out he was a friend of John Winchester's, but they got in a fight and he hates him now. Shocking no one. For some reason, he still trusts John enough to send him a letter. They find out they're vampires. The boys are like, whoa, vampires. Sam's mad at John for not telling them stuff. John is like, an asshole, but they have a heart-to-heart. They bond. They're vampires. They kill all the vampires to get the gun that the vampires stole early in the episode back, and John Winchester still sucks. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so there is a gun from the 1800s that apparently can kill anything, but it has gone missing, and John has been hunting it down, and now it is in the possession of some vampires. And so, surprise, vampires are real, and Sam and Dean didn't know because John apparently is terrible at passing on information to his children. And Sam and Dean both stand up for themselves to John, and they manage to stop the vampires, get the gun, and they decide that they will continue on to hunt the demon together.
Amazing.
Nice.
Yeah. This episode really was like so jam-packed.
So let's jump into it. It's time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. This week our theme is waste. We'll talk about the theme. We'll also just talk in general about the episodes. We will talk specifically about vampires in another little section, so we can talk about them kind of in story-wise, but like in terms of lore, we'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, waste. I mean, obviously, the idea that like if you waste time on a hunt, people die. Like, you can't waste time. You can't go dicking around.
See, I found that so interesting though, because there's so many times where they do just kind of like dick around on this episode. Like there were several times where I was like, you guys are just sitting there. Like the heart to heart that Sam and John had the entire time, I was like, there has to be a better use of your time. Like there has to. Like why is Dean going to get this blood alone? Like I feel like it'd be
yeah, like what was the point of they weren't doesn't seem like John was just cleaning his guns.
Yeah.
Which is not even the guns they were gonna use because they don't work on vampires. And Sam's all worried because he's like, you know, Dean's there alone. He's been gone too long. Like, why didn't Sam go with him? Also, did Sam really want to stay alone with John?
It sounded like John told Sam to like stay behind, and Sam was like, okay, which also didn't make sense to me because I can't imagine that Sam, after the blowout that he had at John, would have been like, yeah, I'm cool to just stay behind.
I'll just hang out with him. And I can't imagine that Dean would have also thought that was a good idea, considering he's literally physically pulled them apart in the previous scene.
Yeah, I was very confused. I was like, okay, fine. We have time to clean guns and pace, sure. But yeah, I mean, I think that it was really interesting, just the idea that like they were both like, we have work to do and like we can't waste time and Dad needs us to do this. And also the scene where Sam had the blowout, I think, was just a waste of time, quite frankly. Like
yeah, like yes, I get that you're frustrated. Yes, this is an issue. Like this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But it also feels like John sort of like wastes a bunch of time by trying not to waste time. Like his whole thing with the boys, every time they ask a question, is for him to just be like, no, just do what I say. We don't have time. Can't waste time. But by doing that, he ends up wasting more time because he gets them all frustrated with him. And then they have to have this big blowout and they have to address the fact that he's not telling them anything for like no real, like him telling them that information wouldn't have been a waste of time. It would have actually been valuable.
And also just like, it can't be that much longer to be like, there are vampires. This is a magical gun that will help us kill the demon. Like, and then if Sam and Dean are like, hey, I got a couple more questions. It's like, Q&A will happen later.
Yeah.
The line that like Dean said, like, hey, we can do the question and answer thing like after we, fight these vampires. And Sam and John were both like, we're gonna keep fighting. Ignore this.
They're like, no, this is more what we want to do right now.
I really did not understand the dynamics in this episode, but that's a whole different discussion. This episode really, I think, was one of the first ones that frustrated me in terms of like the writers and how they wrote for Sam and Dean, but also John, just like the lore behind John. Like I think this was the first episode where I was like, oh, he is a terrible father. Like he's objectively bad.
You get him objective, and you also get him. It's weird because you get him objectively being bad, but you also get him sort of like weirdly, like the scene where Sam and John have their conversation after their confrontation, and John tells a story about the college fund, and they have this whole moment, and then at the end, Sam asks, "So what happened to that college fund?" And John goes like, I spent it on ammo, which checks out. Like that I don't have a problem with. But Sam is weirdly like, that's kind of funny about it. And I was just like, it didn't make any sense in the context of the whole thing their fight had been about.
That was one of the moments that I, forgot was an actual scene. Because I've seen it referenced so much in fanfic that I thought that was like a fanon. Like, we just all collectively like, that's a John Winchester. He would absolutely do that. Yeah. No, he actually did that. That's terrible.
It's canon. It's canon. Like even if your kids it doesn't even make like logic like and this is the thing, and maybe this is what you were referring to. I'd be curious if this is what you're referring to with the writing is like, I don't know if the writers knew entirely what they were doing with John, and like John doesn't always make sense because he's supposed to be like a smart, you're supposed to think he's like this good hunter and that he's like an intelligent guy. But then there's all these like moments where you're like, was that really like the smart decision? Like with getting rid of, like with just like spending the college fund on funds on ammo. Like, did you, look, at what point did you do that? At what
Yeah.
point did you think that was a smart financial decision? And like you really thought your boys had like no possibility of going to college? Like it doesn't seem like I'm like, are you really that like kind of like just like not forward thinking at all in any possible way? And it doesn't, it's just confusing to me.
It's also confusing too because like I thought that the way they wrote John was inconsistent because there have been so many writers over the series, right? Like
Mhm.
we've had probably like 5 or 6 real like iterations of show writers.
Yeah.
Um
And 4 different showrunners. So like,
exactly, right. So it's a lot. But
yeah.
I feel like even within this like episode, they were confused on if they wanted John to be like a good dad who just like tough love or like actually a dick, right? Like
Yeah.
so one of the first scenes that I was like, what the fuck? So it was after like Dean had just been like Sam, shut the fuck up, like listen to dad, like don't be a dick. Like Sam's being a piece of shit to John for like 5 minutes. And then John immediately just criticizing John for or Dean for no reason. Like,
For
oh,
like,
I wouldn't give you this car if you weren't gonna take care of it. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? He was literally just on your side. Like, why would you do this?
I know it makes no sense. Well, and like I've always taken that sort of moment as like John, and I think maybe this is because also of like fan stuff too, of like the reason that John doesn't like does is it's projecting significantly onto Dean, but it's also recognized it's like he knows if he says something to Sam, Sam's gonna bite. Like if he bites at Sam, Sam's gonna bite back.
Yeah.
But up till this point, we haven't seen Dean like challenge John's authority. And so like Dean's an easy target to just be like, I'm mad and I feel like being a dick to someone, but if I'm a dick to Sam, Sam will be a dick back to me. So I'm just gonna like yell at my other son for no reason,
And
even though
it's
he was defending. It was so gross,
the way that he treats Dean this entire episode is so
so shitty.
odd and so shitty that I don't even know if it was like it's not even consistent with the
No,
characterization that I think the writers were trying to go for. Because
no.
like it would make sense, right? If you have one obedient son, one asshole son, that you would probably like or treat the like obedient son with a little bit more respect. But it seems like he like legitimately hates Dean, like for
Yeah,
being a snivel. Like you know what I mean? Like when someone is
yeah.
so pathetic that you're just like fuck you, just like
Where you're
oh I
like,
can't stand you. And like,
I raised you to be obedient, but I also like secretly wanted you to rebel. Like secretly wanted you to, I wanted you to stand up for yourself, but not with me. But now I'm mad at you that you don't stand up for yourself with me.
exactly. And so like when Sam does it, he's always just like whatever, you know what I mean? Like he's never like you said, he's never snapping at him because he knows that Sam's gonna snap back. But
He respects Sam, I think, even
he
when
respects,
Sam is like, even when he's mad at Sam, he respects Sam.
yeah, he does not respect Dean. He does
No,
not
and
respect
it
Dean.
comes across so clearly in this episode, in just the way he
Yeah.
orders him around and like,
But yeah, even Sam though, this was one of the first episodes I can remember not liking Sam, or was I was like, I am a Dean girl, I think. Because after he has this weird ass heart to heart with John, every time like Dean tries to rebel, Sam's like looking over like I should shut the fuck up. And it's like, dude, where were you? Like this was all your thing, like 24 hours ago. You can't be
yeah,
a similar piece of shit now that you guys have this heart to heart. Like,
yeah,
it's great
exactly.
for your brother.
Well, yeah, and like he's been so, and like going back the rest of the season, he's been so mad at Dean that Dean won't stick up for himself to John, that Dean won't say anything bad about John, that he always follows orders. Like he's legitimately like said some cruel things to Dean about the fact that he always follows John's orders. And then now he's like, well, Dad and I worked it out.
Yeah, go fuck yourself,
So like,
basically.
it's fine now. Like, right? It's fine
Yeah.
now.
I truly did not get that. It was yeah,
And yeah, and Dean clearly knows like the dynamic at play because he like two or three times before they have their big blowout, he like you can tell he like senses it coming. He makes comments to Sam to try and like bring it down, which like also just made me like feel, like feel things because, like if you, it's the kind of concept of like you grow up in an environment where any little thing can like set someone off, you become like really attuned to like the things that can become explosive. And Dean is very clearly very attuned to a Sam and John fight, even though it's been like 4 or 5 years since the last time you saw one.
And the way he broke up that fight, like if we looked at like traditional, like, macho movie, like Dean would be a girl, right? Dean would be the girl between two men, breaking them up and being like, no, stop it. You're better than this.
Yeah.
Oh, go sit in that corner. You sit in that corner. And
when
like,
you're ready, yeah.
And it also made no sense as to why Sam was driving. Like, I did not understand that. And they had to do that to set it up so that Sam could do the like little swervy thing. But like, there's no fucking way that Dean was letting Sam drive that car into that fight. And like,
Dean let Sam drive the car like 2 times in this entire season, and they're both fairly big deals.
Yeah, like he like makes a big show about it, but like in both times he gets like before the fight, okay, maybe, but after the fight, like you're still letting him drive. He almost crashed your car. There's no fucking way.
No way. Especially since like Dean's been fairly vulnerable in this episode, and John's been an asshole too. Like, there's no way he's giving up the one little thing he has a little bit of control over, which is that he can drive his own fucking car.
Yeah, I forgot like how, I mean, they make it, baby is like a thing obviously in season 1, but I forgot like that it becomes one of those things that just progressively more like, 'cause I feel like by the end of the series we never see Sam driving the car. So I was just like, what the fuck, why is Sam driving? Like, why?
Yeah, that's actually be a really interesting thing to like find out, is like how much does Sam drive the Impala, like as we go through. I'm gonna look that up later, because I'm very curious now about that, because I think you're right. Like, we've just started to kind of get how important the car is. I think this is the first episode where we explicitly know that John gave the car to Dean.
Yeah.
Like, where we actually know it was John's car before, because I don't know if we actually explicitly knew before this episode that it was John's car and then Dean's car, because it's Dean's always just talked about it as his car. But this one, like, John, when he's ripping into Dean, is like, wouldn't have given it to you.
Yeah. Is this the first episode that we find out that like John told Sam not to come back? Like, because I know that they referenced their fight in like the beginning episodes, but is this the first time that we found out like John was like, stay gone, basically?
I think we knew that one other time.
That was another fight that I thought went on for a lot longer in my memory, and I was like, oh, they cleared it up with just bonding over their dead partners. I feel like there's a bit more childhood trauma that should be brought up there, but okay.
Yeah, it was, Sam like gets over it really fast.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feel consistent with the like level of anger and frustration he's had the whole season. And also the fact that it seemed like, this whole college fight was built and built and built till it happened, until Sam left. Like, this was not a small fight. They've had 4 years to like ruminate on it. One heart to heart where he says, I had created you a college fund. I didn't want this life for you. And also like that whole conversation didn't make a lot of sense, just in that Sam would have bought it. Because like John's whole thing is, after your mother passed, all I saw was evil, and all I cared about was keeping you alive, and I wanted you prepared. And he says like, it never occurred to me what you wanted. And I was like, why does Sam accept that? Because Sam very clearly, and we're going to see this more and more in flashbacks throughout the whole series, Sam clearly told John what he wanted. He clearly had no problem communicating what he wanted. So it never occurred to me what you wanted is not a good enough reason.
Yeah, I never got that either. And like the fact that Sam was just like, yes, the years of like trauma and lack of childhood and like just pure anger, I understand now, because my girlfriend that I was seeing for like 2 years also died.
Right?
It's not adding up. Yeah, I mean, they do try to set up like that Dean is like the gruff one, like John, like wears his clothes and like, but I mean,
Dean's trying to be like John though.
He's trying, exactly, right? Like,
but he's not. He's actually a lot more like Mary.
Exactly. And the whole Mary coding of Dean, I feel like
so much in this episode
starts off like John and like, but diverges, like you said, but then I feel like Dean becomes more and more like Mary, like
ooh, yeah, I like that theory. I like, because he starts out as this like you said, trying to be like John, trying to mimic John, very like overtly masculine and trying to prove that masculinity all the time. And over the course of the show, he's going to become more and more of a like caretaker and more of a caregiver, and leading into some of those more traditionally feminine elements and motherly sort of elements. Like we talked in a, I'm not sure if it was the episode you were on last, or if it was a different episode, but we talked in an episode about how we don't really ever Dean as like Sam's parent in a lot of ways. I never think of it in the sense of like him being like Sam's father. I always think about it in the sense of him being like Sam's mom.
Yeah.
In function.
He is mommy coded so much over the series, and I could write an essay on the modification of Dean Winchester, but yes, it literally like textbook, like they're like, oh my God, forget, like let your dad go, like it's fine, like, you know, don't rock the boat, breaking them apart, and then like, you know, at the end being like, we're not like, it's, they marry Winchester Dean so hard. It's
so hard. So hard.
Speaking of fights, I really want to know what fight John Winchester got in with that hunter.
Yeah.
And then it was so bad that they hadn't talked in years, but not so bad that John Winchester wasn't the first person that the guy thought to write his death letter to. Like,
I wonder, it like they sort of imply, like when we first meet Elkins in the first scene, yeah. And he comes in, he's in the bar, and the bartender, you know, talks to like other patrons about the fact that he like is kind of a hermit that lives off by himself. Like, I wonder if he was an active hunter. Like he seemed to be like he had a like location. He seemed to be like a little more stable, or at least a little more like located in a particular community. And I like wonder about that too.
Yeah. And my interpretation of like the episode and his character was that like he had been a vampire hunter, like that was his deal, thought that he eradicated them all, or like thought that he eradicated enough of them that like the rest went into hiding, and then was like living the rest of his days being like a, I don't want to say like a Bobby type person, not Bobby yet, but like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But like, you know what I mean? Like being a hub for other hunters.
Yeah.
And I would presume that in that case, John would have met him in his travels and been sense. Like, oh, yeah, like teach me about hunting. Because when John reads the letter, he's like, oh my God, the bastard he had it the entire time. It sounds like he was looking for the cult, and he, like, the guy might have been one of the, like, contacts that he had. So I'm trying to figure out what the fight would have been about. And my theory is that, like, the guy hid it because he saw that John was fucking an obsessed bastard and would have, like, gone off and tried to kill the demon, and the guy knew that John wasn't ready and like had no help basically for this. Because I mean, if it was several years ago, it would have been Sam would have either been almost going to college, or like, you know, had just left, and Dean was like, you know, hadn't done that many hunts on his own.
Yeah, they would have been young.
Or they could have been even younger. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
When he met this guy. I mean, his number was near the front of the diary, so I'm going to presume that he met this guy when the boys were fairly young.
Yeah, that's sort of the impression that I always have thought too, especially considering the boys like have no idea. Like Dean recognizes the name because it's in the journal, not because he's ever heard John talk about him, which makes me think that it's, well, one of two things. Like either they were so young that they don't remember because it was before they were really aware of like the hunting world, or it's because John kept information so close about hunting and only doles it out in like tiny little morsels that by the time they were old enough for them to have information, he had already had this falling out.
I mean, I feel like it could be either. Because like as we learn from other like characters become major characters later on, John Winchester has this whole community of hunters that the boys never knew, that he saw several times throughout their childhood, that somehow the boys like never knew about. Like people would know about like Sam and Dean, but like they wouldn't know about them.
Yeah, so John clearly talks about his sons.
Yeah.
Or at least references them.
But like we hadn't, I don't understand that one.
No, and I feel like it's sort of, whether or not this is true or not, it's like John convincing himself that he's protecting the boys, because if he tells a hunter about the boys, then if something happens, the hunters can like take care of the boys and protect them. But if he tells the boys about the hunters, then he's exposing them to, they have information that then could, but it doesn't really make sense because information, especially in like a world like the supernatural, where like information keeps you safe. Like it was also weird to me along the lines of like the vampires is that if Elkins like thought he eradicated them and John knew that Elkins thought he eradicated them, like cool, that makes sense. But then why wouldn't John have told Sam and Dean, or there wouldn't be stuff in the journal about how like vampires used to exist? Like what would be the like point of making them believe vampires never existed? Maybe when they were kids, but like not when they were adults.
Yeah, I don't.
The logic of it is
The
not
logic
there.
doesn't make sense. It feels like you tried to like Harry Potter, Sam and Dean, but you can't do that in this world because like, it didn't really work in Harry Potter, so
No.
it sure doesn't work here. And like, I mean, there are some like inconsistencies in like what character, like how much the boys knew. Like in later seasons, we find out they knew more, maybe kind of, but
Maybe
like
kind of.
maybe kind of like right now, just based on the lore they've already set up, like it makes no sense that like he would have not only hidden them from hunters, but hidden them from like creatures that could have come back. Like I don't think John thought they were ever all gone because when he didn't sound surprised, he sounded more like, oh shit, like they finally got enough, and then rankings back,
Yeah.
And Elkins, based on his like erratic like fear and like as soon as they came into the bar, he like rushed out, indicated that he knew like what they were. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's a very odd that he would keep them away from people who could have helped them.
yeah. And when we're thinking about like the theme of waste, like that sort of wasting of information that's valuable, like they lose time and resources, and like one of the victims like dies, and like, or not dies, one of the victims gets turned and one of the victims dies, and
they could have helped, stepped in sooner had they not been like, had John not shared that information. And also just the theme of John Winchester as a shitty parent and waste. What a wasted opportunity for like babysitting. Like if you have this networks of hunters and like you're on a hunt, like we learned that John, I don't know if that's already been discussed, but John leaves them alone, right?
Yeah,
like
we had something wicked a few episodes ago. 2 episodes ago we had something wicked.
Okay. Right, yeah. So we know at this point that John left them alone for not insignificant periods of time in their childhood. So like,
which seems way less safe than leaving them with hunters.
Exactly. If I had the choice between leaving my two childhood like baby sons in a sketchy ass motel room where I know there are monsters around, and leaving them with a hunter who, like, if something does happen, can at least like help them fend for themselves, and like also like providing them with extra training, providing them with food, warm beds, information. Imagine the super hunters that Sam and Dean could be if they had been just like exposed to like a network of hunters.
Well, exactly.
Wasted opportunity.
Yeah, and we know, like, this is a spoiler, but we know that there are hunter networks, and we also see later on in this show how being a part of hunter networks makes Sam and Dean so much better hunters. Like once they start to utilize those resources, they are able to, like, you wonder why John maybe only ever knew about pretty low level things, and he spent like 20 plus years hunting, and it took him like 20 years to find one demon, and like compared to what the boys are able to do later on in the show with their wealth of information and skills that they've gained largely from other hunters, like it's a waste. John's had to like waste in a lot of ways, like by isolating himself and isolating them, wasted a ton of time.
I have to wonder if the reason is maybe not intentional. Like, you know what I mean? Like if John Winchester just pissed off every single hunter that he came across, and they were all
nobody wanted to work with him.
Nobody wanted to work with him. I mean, because we learned that he's pissed off hunters. I mean, in this episode, right? Like we learned that he's pissed off this hunter. This is not the first hunter that the boys will meet and they'll be like, yeah, no, I fucking hate your dad. Like
it's true. It's more often than not, he's got a bad relationship with Yeah, and we're going to continue to find that out. Like, we know that he has a good relationship with Pastor Jim and what's the other dude's name? There's one other hunter we've had referenced that he
Have
has.
we met Missouri yet?
Yeah, we met Missouri.
Yeah. So like there's some like people that he's either like has a good relationship or like not pissed off enough that they're like, I'm willing to talk to you, but like this is obviously not the norm.
No. And I wonder with someone like Missouri if the reason that she didn't just tell him to piss off is because she knew about the boys.
Yeah.
And that it was not so much about John, but about her, you know, wanting to keep the protection factor open for the boys.
Yeah. Imagine having such a shitty childhood and knowing that you could have had so many great people around you had your dad just not been an insufferable asshole.
Yeah.
That's the only reason. Had your dad been a little bit nicer.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. Like just bare minimum of nicer. In kind of connected to waste, in something that's not a waste, is that at least all of the confrontations between Sam and John do bolster Dean enough to also confront John. And so that is not a waste in terms of those fights. Like I think those fights actually get somewhere that they've maybe never gotten before.
That's why I was so mad when Sam was like, didn't have his back. I was like,
I know.
Dude, this is literally what you've been asking for. Like, this is like peak Dean. Like, you're really setting up for failure here because, like, I would never try to like stand up to John again if I knew this was gonna be your reaction.
Yeah. If I think you're just gonna like fold suddenly after all this time.
I was so mad because literally it was like Dean was like no, with all due respect, we're gonna do it this way, and I was
like yeah, speak up for yourself.
And Dean, and Sam like completely just was like
kind of like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but
especially because Dean's like literally mimicking the words that Sam had said. Like he is pretty much verbatim saying what the two of them have talked about. Like he is using Sam's language.
And I'm actually really sad that Dean didn't call him out on that and be like, hey, what the fuck? Like, what is this? Why aren't you, backing me up here?
Mm-hmm. No, one thing, and it's not really connected to waste, but I was like, ooh, about it. When Dean and John are having that conversation and Dean is calling John out on his crap for treating them like children, he also said, Dean sort of puts the pieces together and goes, the reason you want to hunt this thing on your own is because you want to be reckless in ways you can't if we're there. And I just like loved that moment so much because I think like we had that moment earlier where Sam was like, you and I are not so different, but you have in this moment of like Dean differentiating between himself and John, of him going, you want to do this alone because you want to be reckless. And that's not something that I would even consider doing. Like that's so outside of my, which I like loved because he really just sees John's real motivation and he sees that it's crap. He goes, oh, this isn't about us. This isn't about our family. This is about you getting your revenge and being able to be reckless enough that you can, even if it means you don't make it out. And we pay the price of like losing you.
And I think it's also really interesting, like, so John's supposed to be this like really tactical hunter and like really like one of the greatest hunters. And this episode in general just made me not believe that. Like, I don't know if they were intending that, but like watching it, I'm just the entire time I was like, Sam and Dean save his ass.
His strategy is crap.
Yeah, like he's terrible. And like as the show goes on, like I think Sam and Dean, you start to see like when they become like amazing hunters. By the end of the series, you're like, yes, these are the best hunters out there. And you really believe that. I never got the sense that John was a good hunter. And like the fact that he managed at this point when he's been hunting since the boys were like, babies. So over 20 years of hunting, I don't understand. The fact that like Dean is able to be like, oh, you want to be reckless, and like I don't understand how I would choose to be reckless in a situation where like if I am reckless and I die, like I potentially am still letting the thing that I've been hunting for 20 years go. Like,
Exactly. And then it probably will go after my kids. You are doing the thing that you said earlier is the one thing you didn't want to do. You wanted to protect them. It just, and I have like my theory around that in terms of the like storytelling of the show is that we're getting this, whether or not the show writers and runners intended this over the many years, is that like we are getting John Winchester as this like folk hero sort of fiction. Like we're getting John Winchester as the boys think he is, especially at the
yeah,
beginning, and that over the course of the show that story kind of starts cracking as they meet more and more hunters that didn't get along with John, as they find out more and more things that John didn't know, as they find out like how much bigger this world is than John ever knew. They like how it starts to unwind that whole myth of like my dad's the, it's that whole like when you're a kid, feeling about some adults in your life where you're like, oh, they're the best that's ever was. And then you get older and you're like, that was not true. That was just because of my position compared to their position in the world. And I think Sam sees a little bit of that, and Dean is starting to see a little bit of that, but it's going to take a while before the show shifts to like really show that about John.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the areas in which I wish they'd been more consistent.
Yeah, me too.
Because like had John come in and been this like actually really good, really tactical, like you know what I mean, fighter, I would have been like, okay, like he's an asshole, but at least he gets stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine being an asshole and like you're not even good at your job. No one
Yeah,
likes that guy.
it's just kind of disappointing after a while. You're just like, oh, so it wasn't that you dedicated your life to becoming the best hunter and that means you neglected your kids. It's like you neglected your kids and you aren't even very good.
Yeah.
Like you didn't, it was a waste. Again, it was a waste of your skill on both ends. Yeah.
I mean, also going back to John burning all his bridges with hunters. Imagine if John hadn't like wasted his like opportunity to build a fucking team. And I know the whole thing before like Sam and Dean is like, oh, hunters work solo, they don't really work together. But like, imagine
So
if he had
dumb.
been like not a dick. You know what I mean? Like, and been like, you know what? I'm dedicating my life to like hunting down the thing that killed my wife, but I'm also gonna like help people kill the thing that like
Mm-hmm.
killed their loved one or the reason they got into hunting, and like
Yeah.
built this like team of people to come in when he needed them, so that like if he really was concerned about Sam and Dean helping him, he could have been like, cool, I want you to stay out of this because I already have like 5 other hunters you've been hunting for 20 years to help me. Like,
Right. It would actually been a good reason.
yeah, like it could have, there could have been reasons, and then Sam and Dean could have been like, oh man, that sucks. Like, but we're family, and exploring that idea of family versus like outside forces so early on. Like, but no, he's just like, no, I want to be reckless. I
Right.
want to die.
He's just like not smart about it. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because like later on in the show, and again, some like minor spoilers here, we're going to see a couple of organizations that work in
Yeah.
like hunting supernatural things, and they're almost always like team based because they recognize that like that's how you win, like that's how you eradicate a monster.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine that if I met a bunch of people who also knew about the like bump in the night, basically, who had all these not who had this knowledge and this expertise, and me being like, no, I actually don't want to work with them. Like I don't want to combine our skills and our talents. Like I'd rather just keep going alone. Like that it makes no sense to me. And it's a waste. It's truly a waste that like hunters would not come together. And like imagine if there had been one like giant hunter cabal, and like the boys could have been like running around with other hunter kids, and like they could be
Exactly.
training the next generation of hunters. Like that's what I would want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's
Oh
that's
yeah.
the kind of level of organization that I would want. And sure, there'd be fringe operatives, but like I genuinely don't know why they would not want to group
Yeah,
together.
because that's a very human thing to do as well, like is to band together to create structures that make sense for your needs and your community's needs. And hunters are a community, and usually they're bound together by the same, by the fact that they've usually lost someone to a monster. So it's weird, and it's like a little bit of a lapse in believability for the show, that it takes them a lot of years before we get significant hunter networks.
Like, the basics of that form, or them to even think about like of having something like that. It's interesting.
That is one of the strengths, I think, of some of the later seasons, is some of the more emphasis on hunter networks and those relationships, like not as one-off, because so far whenever we've seen them connect with someone, another hunter or someone else who helps them, it's been in a like very like with Missouri, like was a one-off thing.
I think in the next like season, I think they kind of recognize that they're going to have to bring people back, but like for right now they're not really setting us up to have any kind of relationships outside of Sam and Dean and John, so but I need someone to write this fan fiction. Like I need someone to go and write this fan fiction where there's a hunter network.
I love it.
There's like a hunter Harry Potter style boarding school or something. Like I need it to happen.
Right. I love that. It's like, I mean, again, spoilers, but like a little like the Roadhouse as just sort of a base for all of the like hunter families, where they drop their, when you go on a hunt, you drop your kids off, and
that's exactly.
You have some like the parents and like older siblings who aren't hunting for whatever reason are like holding down the fort and taking care of all the kids and making sure that they get trained, but also get to be kids, and like
best of both worlds.
Like there is a way for the best of both worlds. Sam and Dean are, and it's Sam and Dean just got the real short end of the stick here. Well, let's move to our going meta segment. We're going to talk about lore, character deaths, pop culture, all that fun stuff. I think we have one civilian death, like one. The dude.
And then Elkins.
Elkins, which is our kind of our one significant to the plot death. Bechdel test.
There are two women. Oh my God. I feel like I don't want them, even if they do kind of pass it, they get negative 5 points for having that like vampire makeout scene thing. Like that was weird and unnecessary, and like what was the purpose of that? It felt like it was trying to be like an HBO moment, and then they realized that they're on like primetime television, so they CW. Can't do that. So they're just like so they're just like, fuck it, okay, like just make out a little bit.
That kind of leads us naturally into lore. We'll talk about vampires a little bit more at the end, because I want to just talk specifically about vampires, but in terms of other lore, we mainly have the cult.
Yes. I also Dead Man's Blood. Dead Man's Blood. I forgot that they didn't know about that. That was one of the things, because this whole episode I completely forgot was like first time they had done vampires, and so but I feel like this is one of the ones that like stick around. And the cult.
This is like important lore, like they set it up, and they don't have to like with some other episodes this season, they've like given us some interesting lore and had to renege it kind of like by the next season, because they don't follow through on some things, and this one they actually follow through on, like the cult, the idea of this gun with limited bullets that can kill anything.
I never got why they couldn't make more bullets. I really wish that, hey, like, I know maybe in the next 2 episodes they maybe go into depth more, but like,
I think they address it. Spoiler, I think they address it in one of the later seasons, where they do end up making more, kind of, but again, super limited.
It
might have been a Bobby related thing.
They find out the like more limitations of the cult, and like this is like 5 or 6. I do wish that it didn't take 6 seasons or 5 seasons to get that information. The cult in general, I know what 2 episodes come next. Like, I don't think they go much into depth about it at all, other than like it can kill something. Like,
that's like basically it. That's like basically the only mechanic at play with the cult, is that we have limited bullets and it can kill anything.
I forgot that they use one like immediately, and I
Yeah, me
remember
too. I forgot that as well.
like going, and when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I hated that gun because I felt like they never used it for anything worthwhile. Um, but yeah, so this is the beginning, I think, in my head of like them just fucking around with the Colt.
Well, John has this whole thing where like he's like, I'm not going to use them. We can't waste the bullets. I'm not going to use it. And then he does. And like I get it. They wanted to demonstrate. I get like from the story writer's perspective, like they wanted an opportunity to demonstrate that the Colt worked in this episode. I don't quite know why it was necessary to do it in this episode, but I think they wanted to do it before they have a confrontation with the demon.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
Which makes sense. They want the us as a viewer to know that the cult works. But it felt, yeah.
For the vampires, yeah.
Felt like they could have maybe turned up the heat a little more on like what would take to get them to the point where he would use it.
Well, yeah, well.
And like, yes, Sam was in danger, but it didn't seem like, I don't know. It didn't
seem like the guy like was going to like immediately I don't know.
I thought they could take him. I kind of thought between John and Dean, they probably could have taken him. At least to get Sam, yeah.
I agree, especially because the girls weren't doing anything. Like they weren't like I don't understand why they let them drive off.
And he had his face and he has like his back to John. Like John was behind him. So like yes, John couldn't have like swung at him with the like he couldn't have swung at him with the sword or whatever, but he could like machete, but he could have like clocked him on the head enough that he dropped Sam and then hit him with the machete and like maybe wouldn't have had to use a bullet.
I guess I'm so used to like later seasons where I feel like they get out of impossible situations.
That's
like,
true.
That these situations and scenes seem so like, what the fuck are you doing? But I think they were really like trying to play up the horror movie aspect.
That's true.
The first 3 seasons especially, and that's such a horror movie trope where it's like, let her, or, I want to kill her unless, and then it's like, being shot or someone saving the day from behind.
Yeah, that's true. It's very tropey. And very goes with the kind of gritty, like they just barely make it out of situation. Like in this, I think we talked about this in one of our really early episodes about how in this season, they're really just better at their job than the monsters they're hunting.
And then going back to Dead Man's Blood, like how casually they introduced that. They just kind of like dropped that down.
They don't even really explain it. They just sort of like have it happen, which I think works, but it's like a big thing to just drop.
I'm tossed up on that, right? Because on one hand, I feel like, yes, there's only so much time that you can dedicate to like going over the lore of these vampires. And obviously, because 2 escaped, we presume that we're going to see, if not them, then some more vampires soon.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it was just too much crammed in one episode. Like, because if I'm John and I immediately recognize there's vampires, I'm immediately getting Dead Man's Blood. Like, why didn't they like go in there to when they did the
first attack immediately?
Have that.
Oh, that's weird because it seems like that's a pretty safe bet as like especially if they were going in when they're all asleep. Like, what if you just like went in and stabbed as many, like just go bam, 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 bam. Like, yes, I get that it probably would have gotten messier, but you could have maybe done it in one go as opposed to, not getting it right away does not make any sense.
I literally did not understand why John
did not think of that.
Okay, now that we're going on the way more dangerous mission that this is,
and now they know we're coming
for. Yeah, but they know we're coming for. It's gonna be harder to shoot them. Now let's bring out the bow and arrow with Dead Man's Blood. Like that feels like a first hunt kind of thing to bring out.
Yeah. Moving on to locations. This episode takes place in Colorado, which is one of my favorite states. It's one of the ones. It's one of my favorites. It's so pretty. Anyway, this episode is filmed, of course, not in Colorado, but in the Pacific Northwest. It's filmed in the city, largely. Well, I mean, a lot of it's filmed out in like the forest and stuff. But there is also filmed at a little cafe called Mon Mom's in New West, which I thought was really cute. And I don't know if it still exists or not. Pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they make that many like fun, pithy
No, just the
references.
Twilight Zone reference, really.
Yeah.
Nothing
But like
else.
I feel like that part of Dean where he's just constantly quoting pop culture isn't like a thing yet,
It's like
right? Like,
some episodes it really has been, and some episodes it's like not at all. It's been very interesting watching it ebb and flow. Like
and
in certain episodes, he's like the episode with the ghost facers. He makes like 10 different references in that episode, not
oh my
just to
god,
Ghostbusters, but to a lot of other things.
I forgot Ghostfacers was first season.
Yeah, Hannah and I did that episode a few weeks ago, and we had so much fun. It's the only episode in the whole season that's just lighthearted, like the whole time.
Yeah. Oh
It's
my
so much
god.
fun. Yeah,
And
pretty much.
yeah, and that's the one where we learned that dude dropped the F bomb pretty frequently. We just
Yeah,
can't
and it's so
hear it for
good.
some reason, which makes me so happy.
So it's such a good episode, and it's so fun,
Yeah.
and it's got a ton of pop culture references by many different characters. But it's interesting because they do seem to like lean on those in episodes where it's like where they can, and then in episodes that are like plot heavy, a lot of the plot forward episodes, they've sort of sacrificed those, which is interesting. And like we get less of, I mean, even just an indicator of like Dean's
Yeah.
comfort level with expressing himself freely is a lot less in this episode because John's around.
Yeah.
Like he jokes around a lot more in episodes where John is not around.
Uh,
Though in terms of like
well,
not pop culture, but in terms of just a funny thing is there is that moment where Dean's like laughing about the fact that vampires are real, and he goes like, vampires gets funnier every time I hear it. Like it's just
like
him being
yeah,
amused by
that was,
vampires just for his own sake. It was cute.
yeah, I'm like, I don't know why you find this so funny. Like you haven't hunted down like actual like they've had Wendigos already, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what it like they, I feel like there are weirder things out there, babe.
Yeah.
Like
He's just so like tickled pink that vampires are real. And it's just
yeah.
okay. Last up in going meta is gaydar, so sexuality and gender.
Where does gayness come from and how is it transmitted?
We talked a little bit about the gross lady vampire using a bloody kiss to infect her victim, like unnecessarily sexualized.
Yeah. Just not good and like done in such a weird like consent issue there. The ladies kissing for like sexy times is weird. The odd like a couple bringing their third aspect of it, like
Yeah.
all of it was just like really weird
It
and like well, I
That's
guess
just
they also like they never have women on the show, so they guess they have to capitalize it when they can. Like, it's hard to have a sexy show when all of your characters are like men. You know what I mean?
right,
Like,
and you're 2005 and homophobic.
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, like, which I mean, this is not a problem that Supernatural gets better with,
No.
as we know. But like, I think it's really apparent in the first season
Every
how
time
like
there's a woman, there's like gotta be
yeah, like it's like really bad in the first season.
It really is. It's a appallingly bad.
Yeah.
And this like sort of thing kind of indicates it. The other interesting thing in terms of like gender related stuff, we talked a little bit about Dean and connections to Mary and like gender pieces there, but also like Dean is the one
Dean
that plays
being
the bait because he's
yeah,
pretty.
Dean being the honey pot is like still my favorite thing in the world because I always love to imagine how those conversations go. It's like, all right, Dean, bend over the car and look lost and just like shake your ass a little bit and that'll definitely bring over this woman. And like Dean's just like, got it, can do. And it's like, and no one sees that being weird.
Yeah, and which is probably why they never give us a scene where they specifically talk about the strategy of that, because if they talked about it, it would be weird. So they just like put it in episode after episode where like you're like, why is Dean always the bait? Always.
Like always. And it's like, and you can't even say it's because like I mean, I personally think Dean is hotter, but like Sam's not ugly.
No,
by any stretch of the imagination. Like they're not ugly brothers.
No.
So the fact
Either of
that
them could play that role. Either of them could play that role. And like,
yeah,
yes, Dean's persona is a little more of playing that role in general. So that and or I wonder if it also is like a habit grown out of like, I'm not letting Sam be the bait because that would be putting Sam in more danger, so I will do it.
Ooh.
Like, I wonder if there's a piece of that. Like, I wonder if it started out as John being like, well, it has to be Dean because he's older and it's not safe because Sam's too young. And then it ends up by the time they're adults, Dean is just so accustomed to it.
Yeah.
And would rather be the one to put himself in danger.
Yeah, no, because I'm trying to think, and I'm like, there's no way that like John Winchester didn't give them the orders for what to do for like you know, getting the bait. So like it was definitely like, okay, well, you're gonna be the bait, Dean, because like, you know, it's Sammy, you know.
Yeah, because your job is to Sammy.
Like, the way that he baits them is always sexual.
And
right?
that's the weird part of it. That's the super interesting part when it comes to gender, is like, it's always that.
Yeah, like, because there could have been so many ways that he could have baited them that would not have been like a sexual, you know.
They're
but
playing
John,
to that because of the vampires, and because we were getting all of this kind of coding with the vampires that they're really sexually driven, and that's like what's
also the weird. I forgot, but also the weird vampire making out with Dean too. Like, why did that happen?
I don't.
What was that for?
Feels like a weird choice on the part of the writers to be like, no, this, like, we didn't need more reasons to be like, these are the villains.
Yeah, like her making out with Dean for no reason makes no sense, especially because like you learn that like vampires mate for life literally like 2 minutes before this.
Yeah.
Mate for life means, but her being like, oh my god, you're so hot, I'm always want to make more friends, and then making out with him is like,
well, and she's not trying to infect him. So like the other time with the female victim, it's like to infect them, and it was like weird and unnecessary that it was like through making out, but it doesn't, with Dean it's not that, so it's just making out.
I have no idea, and like I was like, what? This feels so rapey and so like,
it's just like, it is not the first time that they've done that, even in this first season with Dean, and I'm like, that's like Meg a couple episodes ago also did that with, like, it's like, just we're already doing this like weird sexualizing of the boys in non-consensual situations, because again, I think we've got a show without very many females, without any female long-standing relationships. So they don't have a chance for like healthy, like they don't get to have like hot couples making out or having sex on their show, so they end up shoehorning like sexual content in really cringy ways.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not good.
It's not necessary. Do better. They could have done better.
Yeah. Gross.
Ugh, gross. Well, we are going to finish today just kind of finishing up our conversation around some theory, and mostly actually wanting to talk about vampire tropes, because obviously this is vampire episode number 1 of many. And we kind of talked a little bit about things, but I wanted to see if there's anything else you had noticed about the way vampires are portrayed versus how they're portrayed in other things of this era. Because again, this is like pre things like True Blood and Twilight. Like, this is just a little bit before some of those things were huge.
Yeah. So this is like, I mean, these are, I think in this day, people think of vampires and think of probably Interview with a Vampire, which is classic, or they think of Buffy, which would have had the big like vampire lore at the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, one, the fangs, right? Like the fact the fangs are like, they grow out as a second set of teeth.
Yeah, they're like retractable.
Yeah, which I think is like very interesting. I think was actually really cool and very like scary movie of them almost. You know what I mean? Like it definitely has like horror element of like, oh shit, like that's
they're adapting. Like the vampires have adapted to be able to be in society because like that's how they survived.
Also the lack of like burning in sunlight, like that I think is one of the first to be like, no, they're like, it hurts, but they can like do it. Like, because I think Twilight follows the same kind of deal. Like they can be in some like, oh, their Twilight's just sparkling, and then like
Yeah,
True Blood, I believe same deal. Like they can go
I
in
think so.
sunlight,
Yeah,
but like
yeah,
it just kind of hurts them. Right. So I think it's really interesting that they were like one of the first to have that kind of distinction.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean they have a lot of really interesting quirks.
Yeah, the whole once a vampire gets your scent, it's for life, which they don't really follow up on by the end of the episode, but it's very interesting, like the pack dynamics.
Yeah, and also just the like I'm trying to figure out like what if being turned into a vampire makes you immediately okay with it, because Jenny seemed to get on board very quickly. She
Yeah,
seemed to quickly jump on the vampire bandwagon, which was odd to me, right?
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
that was
And
something
she,
that she was interested in.
at this point, hasn't fed as a vampire. Like we didn't
No,
see
so
her, which
no.
is kind of spoiler for later, but we've had a lot of those this episode. But like we find out later that vampires need to feed pretty quick. Like, and that they kind of have
So
this insatiable like need to like
yeah.
when they first turned.
One of the things that I get really annoyed about, and I think that vampires is my like I think I've written like whole Tumblr posts about
Nice.
how annoyed I am about this. They're so inconsistent with their lore
So
on the
inconsistent.
creatures. And vampires, I think, is one of the most egregious examples of
Yeah.
that. Like they literally are just like vampires they don't ever write things down. Spoiler alert, the retractable teeth bit part, they lose that. Like
Yeah.
that goes away.
Yeah.
Um they, it's just so many things that they just don't follow up on that they
Dead man's
establish
blood works
here.
differently at
Yes,
different points.
yeah. Oh my goodness. And like, yeah, but the needing to feed thing, like that's a big deal in later seasons, because there's also like, they can help with it if you haven't fed yet. But if you fed, then like you're a vampire for life,
Yeah.
basically. And there would have been no one around for her to feed with, because Dean saved all those victims, so
Yeah.
she didn't eat them. So it doesn't make sense that she was so on board with like being a vampire.
Yeah. It seems like a weird, just like immediate shift when she wakes up. And yeah, like, super. And I think the problem, like you said, like, is that they're so inconsistent. And vampires are one of those things that they are such classic in monster lore that there's a vampire like almost every season, I think. At least once. They just become sort of a staple, but like a staple in the sense that they become a monster that they can use for kind of whatever they need.
Yeah.
And mess with whatever lore they kind of want to mess with, which is a frustrating inconsistency.
Yeah, they're pretty like the mating for life thing, I don't think comes back.
Never as like they hammer it home this episode. And I think yeah, they don't focus on vampires mating nearly as much.
Now, well, I mean, minor spoiler, but there are vampires that we get to know more of in later seasons that we see their mates, and there's a wonkiness with that, right? And so it's like it's very obviously it's not for life, and also that didn't make sense to begin with, because vampires aren't like they are humans, right? Like, so it's not like becoming a vampire, you're just like, oh my god, now suddenly I'm a lobster.
It doesn't like why did like that's not typical. It's like it's very convenient for the plot of this episode that they made for life.
Yeah, it
and I don't even think they necessarily needed it to be, because honestly you could have just been like they were hooking up, these two vampires, and then she goes missing, and like I would have believed that he would have gone after her even if they weren't like mated for life.
Yeah, I mean, like the idea of like family and like it would, yeah, the idea of like family and like I will do anything for the person I love is such a theme in this episode that like they could have easily just been like, okay, we're like really into each other, like I'm not gonna let you kill her.
They didn't need to make it a bigger lore thing for that to work. and it sets them up for them having to not follow through later on. But that is, I mean, yeah.
They're they're inconsistent, and they're bad at like being consistently inconsistent. So sometimes I feel like in the first like 3 seasons of vampires, they're not a bunch in the first 3 seasons, I feel like, but they're fairly like we keep the same guidelines. And then after 5 and 6, they just start throwing in extra things.
whatever at the wall that they like.
Yeah, and other monsters get that treatment too, which I think is like ghost
and werewolves.
They act, everything acts so differently, like that are like a consistent big bad ghost in like the later seasons than they do in this first season, which is so interesting. I feel like this is such an iconic and like easy way to establish something that I don't understand how they're just like, nah, we're gonna add it.
I'm like, you could have had a 1-pager on like, this is how this monster works in our universe.
Yeah.
If you write about this monster, follow the 1-pager on like, this is how vampires work.
Yeah.
To go back in time to 2005 and
just be like, hey. Yes.
That brings us to the end of this episode. We any final thoughts on this episode in general?
No, I mean, I feel like I need to get a, John Winchester like hate club. You know what I mean? Like that. I get a nice t-shirt with that on.
Those would be good t-shirts.
Yeah, I should invest in some. But no, this was a good episode. I'm really glad I got to do this one.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. This was like so much fun. I love trash talking John Winchester with you. It's
my favorite hobby. Any episodes where he's heavy, expect me to be there.
And we'll have fun. We'll have a good time. So yeah, thanks for joining me today. To anyone who is listening, thank you for coming along for the ride. We wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. And next week, we will be discussing season 1, episode 21, the penultimate episode, Salvation through the Theme of Memories. We are so excited to get to this episode. We've got a fantastic group episode with 4 of us. Cannot wait. Be there next week on Driver Picks the Podcast. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.